I've talked in the past here on the show about my struggles with identity. Growing up with the sole purpose of becoming a doctor, I found myself bereft when considering the possibility of leaving medicine due to burnout. If I stopped being a doctor, who was I? What were my roots? Where do I come from? The truth is, barring my profession, I had much less of a quandary than I had imagined. Although I was struggling with purpose, there was no doubt who my mother and father were, the circumstances of my birth, or even how many siblings I have. I am lucky. For my guest today, however, the answers to these basic questions aren't quite so obvious. Kristen Knapp is a meteorologist out of St. Louis who I had the pleasure of meeting at this year's economy conference. While we spent much time chatting about our financial histories, she also shared her journey surrounding this concept of identity. She's joined by her biological half-brother, Nathan, and her biological half-sister, Rebecca. Kristen, Nathan, Rebecca, welcome to Earn and Invest. Kristen, I feel like our conversation started one day at lunch and we were talking about you submitting a sample to 23andMe. Talk to me
Yep.
about why you submitted that sample.
So let me first say that while there were plenty of challenges in my childhood, feeling loved was not one of them. So I never started this because I felt like a big hole in my heart or anything, although I always did have a lot of curiosity. So really for me, it came down to curiosity, just knowing that that information was out there somewhere and it might actually be easily attainable. I couldn't not try. So I asked my husband for Christmas 2017 for the 23andMe DNA kit, which those were really super popular at the time. Everybody was doing them. And honestly, I didn't actually really expect to find anybody more than anything. I wanted to know, like, what was my heritage? I had no idea. I wanted to know some of the medical information because they test for things like, breast cancer gene and early onset Parkinson's and things of that nature. So I got all that information. I'm British and Irish, by the way. and and that was sort of the status quo for a while. It tells you if you get any close DNA matches in there in the system as well. It gives you those, but it was mostly second, third, fourth cousins, things like that. And then a little more than a year later, I got an email at work one day from a gal who was like, "Hey, I did a 23andMe kit and it says you're my sister. I was born in so and so year." And I'm like, hold up. That math doesn't make any sense because the only sister that I know of that I've never found was Rebecca, who we'll talk to later. And Rebecca's older than me. This gal was younger. So I was like, what's the story here? Right. And I ended up going to my biological mother, who just fiercely denied all of this and was like, no, I didn't have any more babies. I'm like, well, DNA doesn't lie. So, and she'd done this before. There was another sister I came into contact with 20 years ago. She tried to pass her off as Rebecca, and then she was like, "Okay, yeah, I actually had three babies." So this is not new, but that's kind of how the whole thing started, and it was all just more curiosity than anything for me.
So you had been adopted, you'd grown up in a loving family, Kristen, and you had eventually reunited with your biological mother. She had not necessarily been upfront truthful, but you had found out that you had at least three sisters. And at this time you got the 23andMe and found out you had a new half sister. You had already known about two other sisters and met one. Is that correct?
Right, right. In the late 90s, actually, I learned that I could petition the state of Kentucky to do a search. And they did that. And they put me in contact with my biological mother. And then it wasn't much long after that, probably a year or two after that, another sister, Amy, she did the same thing and was put in touch with our biological mother. So that was kind of the status quo for about 20 years that the three of us knew each other. I wouldn't say we were particularly close, but we had open lines of communication. We'd see each other once every other year or so, weddings, funerals, birthdays, things like that.
So, Kristen, tell me about your upbringing. I'm sorry. So, Rebecca, tell me about your upbringing. You knew of Kristen's existence or not growing up?
I did not know about Kristen's existence until mid to late 90s. At that point, that's when I received a letter in the mail from my biological mother. And I wasn't 100% sure that it was me, but I was pretty sure. The birth date, time, weight, hospital, all that kind of stuff matched up. And in that letter, she had told me that I had two sisters, and she had actually given me the name of one, Amy, and her information. But at the time, I did not do anything with that letter. I didn't reach out to them.
Rebecca, tell me about that. So you were adopted, you knew you had some siblings out there, but you weren't quite ready to be reunited at that time?
Um, I knew I was adopted from my whole life. My adoptive parents were very open with me about that, but I also was raised in an extremely loving home. I never felt that, you'll meet some adoptive kids that say, they just felt like something was missing. I never felt that. I had everything I thought, that every other kid had, as far as, loving parents and nurturing parents and things like that. I did have one sibling. We were never close. He was also adopted. But I just didn't have that curiosity that Kristen had. I was kind of content with where I was. And I never did any of the DNA tests. I never did. In fact, a lot of the things that I learned from Kristen. Like, she knew things about me that I didn't know, after she found me. And that was kind of amazing. When I first saw the videos on Facebook and started thinking that it was me. So I started like following along on her page on Facebook. She actually posted a hospital picture of me from when I was born. I'd never seen anything like that. So I just never had that curiosity at all to go out and look for or search for any of my, biological relatives.
Kristen, tell me how you tracked down Rebecca, because
Mhm.
the 23andMe story is how you found your youngest sister, Jill, and
Mhm.
I believe your other sister, Amy, you were already in contact
Right.
with. So how did you and Rebecca meet?
It's a funny story if you're giggling about it. So after we found Jill, we showed that on the air, it got a lot of attention. And I was like, you know what? Let's use this momentum and see if we can't track down Rebecca, the firstborn of the four girls that were all placed for adoption. We knew very little other than, date of birth, hospital, time of birth, things like that. So we did a little video and we put it out on social media on Facebook. The three of us girls were like, help us find our sister. Here's what we know. It got shared very widely. And I guess Rebecca saw it, right, Rebecca?
Yeah. I ran across it on Facebook, and I immediately got out of bed and went and got my original birth certificate out and matched everything up. And I woke my husband up and I was like, oh my gosh, I think this is me. And he listened to it and he was like, no way, there's no way. It was just this random video. And so I created a fake email address and Facebook account and tried to send them messages to say, hey, I think this might be me, but let's make sure first, and finally got through to Kristen at work the next morning, and we started emailing back and forth, but I was still very secretive and thought I was being very guarded. I wasn't at all. They figured it all out immediately, but I wouldn't tell them my name, where I lived, anything about my family until I knew for sure that it was me. But by the time we figured that out, they already had all the information that they needed.
Now, Rebecca, you had sounded like you were reticent originally in the 90s when you got the first letters and started hearing about this. What had changed such that you were ready to maybe make contact?
I don't really know that I was ready to make contact. I shied away from them for a while. I was very resistant, and I hope that I wasn't ugly about it to them, but that was just my personality. I never really thought that I would meet them in person, or, I never had that desire to do that until I started talking to them, and I was like, these girls are pretty great, So I kind of let my guard down a little bit, but it took a while. I think the biggest thing that had changed is the day that I saw that video. My parents passed away 2 weeks apart, a year before that video was shared. And I always worried that my parents would have their feelings hurt if I went searching for my other family. I don't know that they would have at all. We never really discussed it because, like I said, I never really thought about doing it. But in the back of my mind, I thought, if I did do that, would it bother, my adoptive parents? They were my parents, and so That was one reason why I never even thought about reaching out for, or searching for my biological family. But they had been gone for about a year when this video popped up. And then the curiosity hit me, that these girls were out there. And I started kind of enjoying talking to them and finding out more about myself, honestly. Like Kristen let me know that they had contact with our birth mother. And so she knew that I was actually the only one of the four of us that went home from the hospital with our biological mom, who thought she was going to try to raise me and then turned around and put me up for adoption. The other three were immediately placed for adoption. I never would have known those things about myself because I never searched for that.
So Nathan, I want to bring you into the conversation, but before I do, Kristen, tell me the way you introduced Nathan and Rebecca to me to help explain your relationship. Tell the audience what you told me before we went live.
I said Rebecca is literally my sister from another mister, and Nathan is my brother from another mother.
So Nathan, your father basically had a baby with Kristen's mother, who is Kristen. And yet Kristen was put up for adoption. Your father left that relationship and eventually had you, and you grew up with your father. Did you know that you had a sibling out there that you had never met?
I had no clue. I thought my family was solidified between my mom and my dad and my biological brother. I thought that was it. So when this all happened, it was something new and different, at least for me.
Did your father know there was a child out there, or did he not know either?
He had no clue the entire time. So Kristen was kept secret for over 40 years.
So tell me what that felt like. Like, Nathan, how did you find out of Kristen's existence? And tell me about that moment when you learned.
Well, I found it interesting because the day before Kristen reached out to me, she stalked me on social media. And I think it was mainly for the fact to see if I was a normal human. I was a productive member of society, and maybe test the waters to see if I was even worth reaching out to. So it kind of caught me off guard when a random meteorologist from St. Louis tries to befriend me and follow me across social media. And at that time, I live in St. Louis now. I live right down the street from Kristen. So, but at that point, I didn't know who she was. So I was actually at work one day, and I received an email through Ancestry DNA, and Kristen, she sent me a note and was like, "Hey, it looks like we're really close relatives. Can you help me, figure this out?" And I said, "Sure." And I responded. I said, "Let me just get a little bit more information from you about, who your biological mother's name is, where you were brought up, and maybe I can help you kind of connect some dots." And it was a really close match. The ancestry kit said, "Hey, we're either half siblings or first cousins." And at that same time, as soon as I got that email from her, that initial email from her, I was in the back of my brain doing some fuzzy math, trying to figure out which one of my aunts or uncles was up to no good in college, and the math never checked out. So as soon as she came back with more information, I kind of cross-checked some facts with our dad, and the rest is history.
Kristen, I want to talk about how all of this changed your concepts of family and your own identity. Let's start with family. How do you define family now? Because I imagine for you, this connection between who you brought up with, who were the adults in your life, versus these siblings who you didn't even know. How has that changed your concept of family?
That's tough. Obviously, my parents that brought me up, that's mom and dad, right? But biological family, that's family too. However, I do believe sometimes we choose our families, in the sense friends become family and such. And I also think that just because someone is family, maybe they don't have to be, i.e., through this process, there were some not so great things that happened with my biological mother. We don't have to go into detail there, but there's just a lot of lies and a lot of toxicity. So at the end of the day, you have to protect your mental health. And if that means putting up a barrier there and being like, no, this isn't going to happen, that's okay. And I know Rebecca has similar feelings about that as well. I don't think she's ever been in touch with her and doesn't have any plans to be.
Rebecca, do you consider Kristen family?
I do. It's a different kind of family. It's hard to really put into words. I feel like even with like stepchildren and things like that, like if you're not raised in the same home, my definition of family just seems different, but I know she's family. We have a lot of similarities. We get along really well. The conversations always flow easily. I feel like she's still somewhat of a stranger. I don't know a whole lot about her. I know Nathan and Kristen, they're together a lot. They live in the same town. They do a lot of things. They hang out together. We live hours apart, but we've met in person twice. Yeah. All four of us sisters met once. Shortly after we all found each other, and then Kristen came to my hometown and spent a weekend there, and it was great. I enjoy spending time with her and look forward to getting to know her better. But there's still so much about her and her family and her upbringing and everything that I don't know. I mean, we talk a lot about it, but it just there's I'm 50 years old. There's almost 50 years there that I didn't know any of these people. So it's just different.
Rebecca, I'd love for you to share. I know you told me that when we found you, that at some point you felt like maybe your parents played a role in us finding each other, but also, if you don't mind telling this on yourself, because I think it's adorable, that how nervous you were when I came to see you that last time, because you didn't know that we'd have anything to talk about.
I was. I mean, it was, like I said, like almost like a stranger coming to spend the weekend. And, like Kristen said earlier, you make your friends your family, and I know their ins and outs and their habits and what they like and what they don't like. And this was like, someone new coming to stay with us for the weekend that I'd met one time, and I didn't know, where does she want to go eat? What does she want to talk about? Where does she want to hang out? Does she, and it was so easy. Once she got there, all of those fears, I didn't need to spend any time worrying about that, but I did before she got there, just because because of the unknown. But it all flowed very well, and we had a great time. But what did you ask me first?
Well, you told me at one point that you felt like maybe your parents had a hand in this.
I did. I worked for my dad. He was a dentist in town, and my mom worked at his office too. And so, as a young adult, they were such a huge part of my life. They were a huge part of my life all the time. But even after I had grown up and had a family, I was with my mom and dad all the time. And like I said, I had one sibling, but we couldn't be more polar opposite. And I was never close to him at all. He was never close to my parents at all. He was also adopted. He was one of those children that was adopted that did have a lot of questions about where he came from. He had substance abuse problems. Did that maybe stem from genetics or things like that? And so he was never really around. So it was just the three of us. And when my parents passed away, actually, my mom passed away 5 years ago this week, and my dad was 2 weeks before that. They passed away so close together. It was like my whole world was turned upside down. And I'm married and have 3 girls, and they're my family now, but that part of my life was kind of gone. And so when these girls came around, I was like, maybe that's a sign from my parents that it's okay. It's that they're not upset that I look into this and reach out to these people. And maybe they sent them there so I had family, because I felt that was the point where I felt a hole. I felt a void because my family was gone. I had my husband and my kids and his family, but that part of, my life was just gone so quickly all at one time. So I kind of felt like maybe they were, playing a part in that, saying it's okay to do that now. So
Kristen, as Rebecca was talking about being nervous when she first met you, I'm reminded of the video you allowed your news station to capture you meeting your other youngest sister, Jill, I believe. You and Amy
Yeah.
met Jill, and you can see on the camera her hands are shaking.
Yes.
And some of the kind of I'm sure giddiness, anxiety, fear, and happiness and joy all rolled in one of meeting someone who is related to you, finding out you had a sister you didn't know you had. Nathan, so you got a sister, but you also have a sister who has 3 other sisters. Like, and this is the first time you're meeting Rebecca is right here, right now.
Yeah.
Has your conception of family changed at all? Because I'm thinking, like, what does Rebecca mean to you, Nathan, the sister of your sister? Like, how do we even conceptualize that?
That's a good question. I haven't really thought about it until right now. I mean, I think to Kristen's point, in many cases, we really we choose our family. We can choose our tribe. We can choose the people that we want to really surround ourselves and help, and hope that they enrich our lives. So, for me, I consider, this kind of very, very similar. I don't know Rebecca very well, but ultimately at the end of the day, she is folded in, and everybody else is folded in too. So, ideally we could use this as a catalyst to, get to know each other and more down the line. So, so for me, I've always felt too that, we can choose our families and figure that out. So I kind of adopt that mentality too.
So, Kristen, we can choose our families, but can we choose who we are? Tell me about some of the similarities and differences you found when you found these siblings. Did you find that you were very similar to them, although you had been brought up in different circumstances?
Yeah. Well, just a couple little interesting notes. Like 2 of the 4 sisters are both like teachers and married guys named Joe and have beagles. It's really weird. Um, I go into schools a lot and talk about weather, and people are like, "Oh my gosh, you're such a great teacher. You missed your calling. You would be great at this," So, and Rebecca, your girls are both teachers, right?
I have 2 that are teachers now, and one that's currently in school and will be teaching in about a year and a half.
Yeah, so there's
And I
something
was
to
a
that.
substitute teacher for many years before I started working for my dad. So
And a lot of us are all very, I think, very kind of like right brains and planners and really organized. And uh, I jokingly say almost to the point of a little OCD about some things. I mean, Rebecca, do you feel like you share that?
yeah, I think like the similarities and differences that I found immediately were Kristen and I are both kind of take charge, kind of loud and outspoken, where Amy and Jill are a little more timid and shy, and they kind of, hover to the back. I think another really interesting thing is that Kristen and I were actually at the University of Kentucky at the same time. It was crazy to me when all of this happened to find how close in proximity we all were raised, and never really crossed paths, but yet we really actually did. And I thought that was kind of cool. So we were both wildcats, at least for a while. And yeah, it just, there's a lot of differences as well, obviously, but they'll say or do something and I'm like, oh my gosh, that kind of reminds me of myself. I don't think we look anything alike. Now, I'll show friends pictures of us and they're like, "Oh, I see it." And I'm like, "I don't see it." But maybe I'm crazy, but some people can definitely see similarities in our looks.
So, how we were both at the University of Kentucky at the same time. I've got to tell this story about Nathan because this is also this is bananas. My very, very first TV weather job was in Columbus, Mississippi, population like hardly anything, right? You probably never heard of it. Columbus, Mississippi, 1996 or something like that. I did weekend weather when I was finishing up at Mississippi State University. Nathan was in boarding school. How many blocks away at that time?
It was right down the street, maybe 4 blocks.
Wow.
Yeah. And then also, and this is just kind of random, like how many people do you know that ever worked at Disney World? Like Nathan grew up in Mississippi. I grew up in Kentucky, and we both worked at Disney for a while. Now, not at the same time, but still, just a lot of weird little things like that.
Kristen, we've mostly talked about similarities or differences from your mother's side. How about from your father's side? First and foremost, Nathan is not your only half brother, correct?
Right. There's another one. Yeah, he lives in Tennessee. First of all, let me just say, when I first found my biological father, I was shocked to learn that he's actually in my like TV viewing area, which I never expected in a million years, because I grew up in Kentucky. I thought he was over there somewhere, right? But he's actually just right across the river in Southern Illinois, about an hour away. So he had seen me on TV, had no idea I was his daughter. Shortly after we all met and all of this stuff came out, Nathan had some changes in his life, and he was working remotely, and he moved to the area because he was in Chicago when we first found him. So now we get to hang out all the time. We travel together. We're so similar. We have such a good time together. So similarities. This is actually one of my favorite stories. Nathan, were you there in the barn that day with the chains, or did I just tell you about that? You were there.
I was.
Okay. Okay, so there's a family farm, big, giant farm, lots of barns. And my father was kind of showing me around one day. And we go into this barn, and on the wall are all these chains, and they're all organized by like size and weight, and just like perfect organization of chains in a barn. And that was the moment I'm like, oh my gosh, yeah, this man is my father, because I would have done the exact same thing. And my husband's always like, because it's a little over the top, the organization sometimes, and the need to have everything a certain way, right? And that's the first time I've ever seen that in somebody else and been like, that's why.
We are talking to Kristen Knapp, who's a meteorologist out of St. Louis, who I had the pleasure of meeting at the Economy Conference a few weeks ago. And she is joined by her half-brother Nathan and half-sister Rebecca. And we are discussing the nature of family as well as identity. We're going to take a short break. I'm Doc G, and this is the Earn and Invest podcast. All right, I'm going to read us back in. Do you guys have questions before I do? All right. Nope. Awesome. On 3, 2, 1. Let me reintroduce you. We're talking to Kristen, Nathan, and Rebecca. They are all siblings, although not all related to each other. Rebecca and Kristen share the same mother. Kristen and Nathan share the same father. And we're talking about the nature of family and identity. Nathan, did you see the documentary what is it? It's 3 Identical Brothers? Or was it 3 Identical Strangers? Did you see the documentary 3 Identical Strangers?
No.
So it's this really interesting documentary. And the reason why is it's a group of identical triplets who are separated at birth and stumble into each other. And what's really fantastic about the documentary, if none of you guys have seen it, I really suggest you see it. In the beginning, they talk about how similar the brothers are, how they had the similar likes and dislikes. They had similar, ways of standing. They all like to smoke the same cigarette, all these kind of things. But as you go through the story, you start seeing that actually all 3 of them are a product of their upbringing and the 3 different families they grew up in. And they have this wonderful montage at the end where you realize that they're actually very different. And we tend to glom on to the things that are similar about them because we know that they're identical siblings. But ultimately, in the nature versus nurture struggle, we see that nurture, at least in their case, may have won out. And so, it's just this interesting look at people we're related to and who we become. And so I find it really interesting as we listen to all your shared stories, maybe some of your similarities, but also very different lives. Like you all seem to kind of grow up, and it sounds like fairly happy families with different upbringings, and now you're doing different things. Nathan, tell me, How has this changed your ideas about yourself? Like, as you found out you have this sister, you've gotten to know her, you guys now live close to each other. Has it changed who you see yourself as?
I don't think so. I've before meeting Kristen, I had a very established life. I think if anything, this has just been an added bonus. I think outside the fact of me now being a middle child, I think this is now it's just something it's something new and special that I didn't have before, and I was never really seeking it, or I was never feeling that there was a void. I think it's now I have a built-in friend that lives down the street, and we can hang out, and we happen to have a lot of things in common. And it's funny too, because you mentioned a lot of the commonalities and similarities. Over time, as Kristen and I got to know each other, we found there are differences. Like she is a total planner, and I would prefer her to be a planner. So if we do things or go on trips or vacations, I'm very happy with just Venmoing her however much it costs. And also, she is very structured and organized, as well as our biological father. But you're not looking at my desk right now, where I actually have just a pile of receipts that ultimately need to get categorized for work. So there are a lot of similarities. There are a couple differences. At the end of the day, though, like this is something new and special that is just an added bonus to where I was in my life.
Kristen, let's talk birth order. Like, I always tell people I was so lucky to be the youngest because I got the best of everything. I always say that my brother Mark is the most organized because he's the oldest and he was the go-getter. And Andrew, our middle brother, was, the most interesting and artistic, and because he was a middle brother, so he's always toying with things and left on his own. Did it give you a little perspective to realize that you are now, I don't believe you're not the oldest, you're not the youngest, you're right in the middle of the bunch, right?
Yeah, well, with the girls, yeah, Rebecca's the big sister. I'm second out of four on the girls. On the boys' side, I'm the big sister now. I'm the oldest, which I think Nathan's a little cranky about not being big brother anymore. He's little brother. But yeah, no, I do. Rebecca kind of mentioned that whole we're both like these take charge people. I think that is part of being kind of a big sister, the older sister. I think you kind of certainly, since we have found each other as an adult, that has not changed about us. I'm not the oldest, but I'm still very much a take charge, as is she. And I imagine Nathan, with many regards, you are as well.
Rebecca,
Yeah.
tell us about your children. What did they think of all this? I mean, by the time Kristen came into your life, your kids were growing up or grown up?
They were grown. Yes. My oldest daughter is 26 and my youngest is 19. I have one in the middle. They were super excited. Like they knew, like I told you before, I believe I'd received that letter many years before. They knew about that. So they knew the idea of me having siblings was definitely a possibility. And so my husband and I sat them down that next day after I had run across that video, and I said, I think this is me. And they were like, let's find out. So they actually were the ones that like helped create all the accounts and sent out the messages, these anonymous messages that I thought were so anonymous, but they were very excited about it. They were excited about having more family. They had a lot of friends that had like a lot of cousins and a lot of aunts and uncles, and they just never really had that. They have one aunt and uncle on my husband's side and their cousins there, but that was really all the family that they ever knew. And so they were really excited. They were with me when we went to meet the first time. All of our families were together. So that was kind of cool. They have not, had the opportunity to spend any more time with any of them. But neither have I. So, we haven't all gotten together again, but my girls were really excited about the idea.
Nathan, how has this impacted your life? I mean, looking back, finding out you have a sister, now you guys live close. It sounds like you spend a lot of time together. How has this changed you?
Well, I never anticipated moving to St. Louis. So she actually jokingly one night, we were having a game night, and she just jokingly said, move to St. Louis, be close to like me and your dad. And And I thought about it, and a couple days later, I said, you know what? Sure, cost of living is a lot more reasonable here. We were in the middle of a pandemic. I said, you know, why not? So that's probably the biggest change is physically, but you know, emotionally, it's you know, it's nice. It's nice that I get to see her often. We get to hang out, and it just kind of quickly turned into a really, like, siblings aside, we just turned into a really good friendship.
Kristen, there are lots of people who are standing at the cusp of that Pandora's box, looking at the 23andMe or whichever genetic test they choose and thinking about sending it in. What would you tell people who are about to take that step? Maybe they think, I'm adopted, I could have some siblings out there, or wondering who their biologic parents are. Can you
Yeah.
give some advice to the person standing on that precipice right now?
I would say make sure you are emotionally ready. I would even say make sure you're emotionally strong because this can go sideways. And Nathan and I, after we went through all of this, we joined some different Facebook groups that talk about these types of scenarios, like people doing DNA searches and what they find, what they don't find. Um, there can be some pretty traumatic things. I mean, through my experience and going through this whole process of putting all the pieces together, there were some pretty awful things that I was told at one point. Of course, I found out those things weren't true. But my point is, lots of ups, lots of big downs, and you might find out something that you wish you rather maybe didn't know, right? So I would just go in, especially if you're looking for somebody. I would just say, go in hoping for at best learning the truth, and if a relationship comes from that, bonus. But you can't expect that. You really can't. And when I first met these guys, I even said the first email I ever reached out to Nathan, I said, look, I don't want anything. I don't need anything. I'm just trying to figure out where I fit in all this, right? Like I'm established. I don't need your money because I think that's one of the first things. What do they want from me, right? So yeah, I even told my biological father, I was like, you don't owe me anything, And he's like, but you're my daughter. And I'm like, well, I love that you feel that way, but I'm just saying you don't have to. If you don't want this relationship, that's okay. But from the very beginning, he embraced it.
Rebecca, let's look at that from the other side. You were the person who ended up being sought out, right? So you weren't the one doing the searching. You were the person who was sought out. What advice can you give to people who maybe get an anonymous message through Facebook or in the mail saying, hey, I think we're related? What can those people do? Or what do you think the safest way to look at the type of situation is?
Well, I feel like in my case, once I got to that point that I was getting ready to take that 23andMe test, I didn't have any expectations because I wasn't the one that was, going out searching. I worried about the other girls because of what may come back from my test. And some of that turned out to be, some fears that I had, came to reality. But I had no expectations at all. I knew in my heart that it was me, before I took the test that they were looking for. But I think we got a little more than that with me taking that test. So I think Kristen's right. You just have to be emotionally prepared, especially if you're searching something out, by taking that test. I think it can be really hard.
I want to jump in and elaborate a little bit on what Rebecca's saying there. My biological mother had told me that Rebecca and I were full sisters, that we had the same father. And she had told me back in the late 90s who my biological father was. And over the next 20 years, while it wasn't a close relationship, I got to know he and his boys. And one in particular, this is my brother, and weddings, funerals, all the things, and then when Rebecca's test came back, the test kit came back and said we were halves. My immediate thought was, well, she's blonde. She's got a different dad. Of course, these people that I've been told for the last 20 years are my paternal side. Obviously, she's just got a different one, But it started bugging me. It was bugging me. As a scientist, I'm like, I got to figure this out. I can't not figure this out. So I called up my brother, or at least the person I thought was my brother. I said, hey, if I send you this kit, will you do this test? And he's like, this is dumb. Of course we're related. We look alike. We're so similar. And he did the kit, and he texted me at work one day and said, can you give me a call when you get a minute? Because I'm looking at these results and I'm clearly not reading them right because I don't see your name anywhere. And that's when I knew he hadn't put it together yet. And I immediately messaged Rebecca and said, hey, can you log on to your kit and see if there's any new names that have popped up? And there was my brother. So, i.e., the paternal family that I had gotten to know for 20 years wasn't my biological family, it was her biological family.
Wow.
Yeah. So that's when there were a lot of lies and a lot of awful things from my birth mother to cover that up. But anyway, ultimately, I decided to try to find my biological paternal family, did an ancestry kit because I hadn't done that one yet. And that's how we found Nathan. And that's where all that started.
So you knew Rebecca's brothers before she knew her brothers.
Yes.
I don't know them still.
You had thought they were your brothers.
Right.
Which they ended up not being because your mother was not fully truthful with
yes. For more than 15 years, these people were in my life. Yeah.
All right. So Nathan, I have to go to something way more lighthearted. This has gotten heavy quick. So I met Kristen at the Economy Conference. This is a financial independence conference. This is the test of whether you're truly your siblings or not. If you're truly a sibling of Kristen, you probably think she's crazy for being interested in financial independence. So talk to me about your feelings of what has Kristen talked to you about this conference she went to and the stuff she's into, and what do you think about it?
Oh yes. She's talked to me about it. She has roped me into the FIRE movement. Even when she and I met, I told her that I had ambitions and goals to retire remarkably early. And and so she and I have had the conversations of what steps we need to take in order to get there. And then just she started to talk to me more about different conferences and different books and opportunities to get there in a smart and strategic way. So just put that in the column of more things that we have in common. She just introduced me to it. I had no idea that the FIRE movement really existed, and until she kind of educated me more about that.
We went to Camp FI together.
We did. Yeah.
So you're down the rabbit hole now.
Oh, I am.
And Rebecca, had you heard of this financial independence stuff? And
no, not at all. This is one of those huge differences. I just hope that I don't have to work for the rest of my life. No, I'm teasing. I've raised 3 girls, and so putting all 3 of those girls through college and those kind of things. So retirement is definitely on the back burner for me right now.
Well, I wanted to thank you all for coming on the show today. My idea behind having you on was this idea of trying to understand identity and where we fit in and how that jibes with family. And as I listen to your stories and how complicated they become, you realize that on some level, family is biological, and on another level, it's chosen. And what's interesting about your story is you've now chosen to take the biological connections and rebuild a family that maybe was taken from you. And so it's wonderful to hear and definitely inspiring. And yet I can tell through these conversations that it's complex and it's complicated. And going through my own struggles of trying to figure out who I was after the death of my father, taking on a career path that was his career path, and trying to not only understand who I was through a father I had lost, but also differentiate myself from him. I can only imagine how complicated it is to find out you have a bunch of siblings you didn't even know you had. Thank you so much for coming on today to talk about these issues. Kristen, you are part of the financial independence movement, whereas Nathan and Rebecca are probably not tied to this community. So I'll start with you. What's coming up next in your life? And if people want to know more about your journey, what's the best way to reach you?
Well, if you live anywhere near St. Louis, you can tune into News 4 and you'll see me do the weather. Otherwise, if anybody wants to discuss anything, honestly, I think the best way would just shoot me an email. I'm at kristen.cornett@kmov.com. Also, if you want to see any of these news stories, just go to Google and type in Kristen Cornett DNA, and they're all going to come up right there.
And Nathan, we may run into you at some financial independence events like another Camp FI, right?
You probably will. Probably will.
So that may be the best way to get in touch with Nathan. Rebecca, tell us what's coming up next in your life.
Actually, my oldest daughter is getting married in a couple of weeks, so that's big news around here. So that's where our focus is right now.
So your family is expanding because she's bringing, she's getting married
Yeah.
and maybe one day children. So
Yeah.
excellent. Well, this has been the Earn and Invest podcast. On behalf of myself, Doc G, I wanted to thank Kristen, Nathan, and Rebecca. Thank you guys so much for coming on and telling your story.
Thank you.
That's a wrap. All right, cool. I usually leave things running just a few minutes to catch whatever we talk about after as the after show. Man, you guys, I mean, it's a complicated story.
Mm-hmm. You seem to follow it pretty well, though. Usually I have people stopping me all the time and be like, now wait, now how?
So let me get this right. So there's Kristen, Amy, Jill, Rebecca, same mother, all different fathers.
Mm-hmm.
Rebecca has a different father who has two children who you thought were your brothers, but are not.
Mm-hmm.
And Nathan and you share a father, and you also share a brother.
Right. That's impressive. I'm impressed. Very good.
so I think I have it all. But yeah, I mean, there's the biological necessity of knowing like your family history and what medical problems run in your family and those kind of things. But I imagine too that it fills in just some of the history of who you are, right? Like, who am I in this world? Where did I come from? Even if those, the people who are your biologic parents may not play a huge role in your upbringing, it still gives you, I guess, some perspective of where you and kind of your people come from.
Yeah, I mean, just seeing where some of my most significant traits came from for the first time, like, what a big light bulb moment, having always wondered, why am I like this? That was big.
It also seems so clearly your mom had some mental health issues. There was obviously some lying and some things there, but in a sense, it sounds like she did the best she could for you all by giving you up, and you all seem to get placed into wonderful families.
I'm pretty sure Rebecca and I agree.
Yeah.
Thank God she made the decision that she did. Yeah.
100%.
Yeah. It sounds like the worst thing she did was keep from you kind of the information about your fathers, which, or even letting them know that they had other children, which I guess was the downside.
Yeah, I don't know what's going on with her, but unfortunately she likes to tell lies for attention and some things like that. And you turn your head for a lot of years and you say, oh, she had a rough life, but sometimes those things get bad enough. You just kind of have to be like, okay, well, now this is harming me. And we just can't, we're not going to have a relationship. It is what it is.
Yeah. It's not a perfect story, right?
It's not a perfect story.
It's not everyone is happily ever after per se. Yeah.
But let me say this, and this is what I tell people through all the ups and downs, and there were many. At the end of the day, look at all this amazing that has come out of this, right? I mean, come on, I would do it again 100 times over.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you again for being on the show. I'll let you guys know when it comes out. It usually takes about 3 or 4 weeks. I'll edit it up and I'll try to send you a copy before it goes live. But, I'll get rid of awkward pauses, spaces, things like that. And I'll try to make it pretty smooth. But it's an engaging topic and you guys have an engaging story. So thank you for doing it.
Thanks for letting us tell it.
Awesome. Nice meeting you all. Have a great weekend.